This is the Human Action Podcast, where we debunk the economic, political, and even cultural myths of the days. Here's your host, Dr. Bob Murphy.
Jonathan, welcome back once again to the Human Action Podcast.
Hey, Bob. Thanks for having me.
Sure thing. Well, you have been a naughty boy, judging by the reaction from some other primarily Hayekian economists on Twitter, that you posted your latest article in the QJAE. There ain't no such thing as sticky prices. Is that the you're trying to make it accessible to the layperson with your slang there? And anyway, do you want to just explain, like, maybe a quick snippet of, what are you trying to do in the paper? And then maybe we'll go back and forth between the reaction. I'll sort of play devil's advocate, like, because I read a lot of the reaction to it. And I understand why people are, falling in their swooning couches based on your paper, but we'll go ahead and just get into that stuff. But for the people who are deciding, do I want to listen to this podcast? What are we going to be talking about?
Yeah, so the title, as you said, is There Ain't No Such Thing as a Sticky Price. And the idea here is to apply the Misesian plain state of rest equilibrium construct to markets and see if or how or whether sticky prices can cause markets to not clear. So one of the conclusions that we draw from the Misesian plain state of rest is that after every realized transaction, so we're talking about real world transactions, we're not talking about some idealized model where we've got consumers doing calculus, figuring out the tangent spot on their indifference curves, doing that sort of thing. We're not talking about perfect competition model. We're talking about actual real exchanges. And what happens in a real exchange, a voluntary exchange, is that the quantity supplied equals the quantity demanded, and which is our definition of, or our condition of market clearing. So when somebody purchases anything from anyone, it means that they demanded that quantity and the person supplied that quantity. So what is demonstrated in the real world is an equality of quantity supplied and quantity demanded. Now, so Mises called that the plain state of rest, and it wasn't just Mises, but you can actually see some of the beginning, like the start of this idea going all the way back to Karl Menger. You see it in Bombawerk, you see it in other great Austrian economists like Frank Fetter, and Joseph Salerno, a great modern Austrian economist, has written about this extensively. But one thing that I wanted to do in this article is use it to confront this idea of non-market clearing sticky prices. Now, the reason why it's such a big deal, I guess, big picture, the reason why it's a big deal is one of the main things that separates the Austrian school of economics and other schools like monetarism or the Keynesian school, especially when it comes to macroeconomic questions, is this idea of idle resources. Is it possible that we in a recession, we have all of this underused capacity, all these resources and potential workers who can't get a job for whatever reason? And of course, the Keynesians and the particular school of thought that I'm addressing in this paper is the monetary disequilibrium theory guys. They say that there's something wrong with prices. They can't adjust fast enough to get people employed or to get resources employed in a recession. And so, since that's one of the main differences between the Austrian school and other schools of thought, I thought it'd be worth taking some time to think through, like, what exactly is happening in markets when it looks like prices aren't changing very fast. Like, what's actually why are people reluctant to lower their price? And can we say, as a matter of scientific fact, can we say that there's something wrong with prices not adjusting, or can we say that the market is not clearing, or is there something else going on? And so that's what I go through in the papers. I explain that there's something else going on, that the market is clearing, and it might just be for a moment, which means that there's some pretty bad implications for Keynesianism and for monetary disequilibrium theory.
Okay, so a lot there, and basically, folks, that was a good summary, and we're just going to pull the threads on a bunch of the stuff you brought up there for the rest of this episode. Okay, just to make sure we're not losing people, maybe start with this idea of market clearing, to say, oh, do markets clear or do we not have market clearing? you're saying that, and then I think this is consistent with what other economists mean too, to you to say, oh, the market's clearing right now means for the particular good that we're talking about, that the quantity supplied equals the quantity demanded. Is that true?
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And now for people at home, like, it's like, well, what would it mean if it didn't? For example, let's say that there's rent control. Some Mamdani comes in and then he says, wow, the rent is too darn high. And so from now on, it's illegal for, a 1-bedroom apartment in Manhattan to charge more than, I have no idea what they are now, $1,500 a month. And so what would happen at that price? A lot of people would want to rent who aren't currently doing it. And a lot of people who own units would no longer be as interested in putting them up. Certainly people who have, it's like spare bedrooms and things that they might have been renting, it's not gonna be worth it to them, right? So you'd say in that situation, the quantity demanded would be a lot higher than the quantity supplied, and there would be a shortage, right? And so what we mean, again, just to be precise about it, is that at the prevailing price in the marketplace, that more people want to buy units than other people want to provide, or vice versa. If there's a minimum wage that, they say, oh, $25 an hour, Mamdani says. That's how, these young kids today need to be able to live on this. So $25 an hour, you have to pay. And so a lot of kids want to go and work at McDonald's and Burger King and stuff, get paid $25 an hour, but not a lot of people want to hire them at that price. And so you'd have large scale unemployment, or there would be a glut of the, amount, labor skill or labor hours offered at that price. And so so in both of those examples, the market would not be clearing. Okay. So everybody involved in this discussion, even your detractors on Twitter, Jonathan, certainly we all agree with a price ceiling or floor imposed by the government that markets aren't going to clear. And now, though, where things get interesting is certainly Keynesians will say, oh yeah, the free market left to its own devices can get stuck in a glut, or in a rut, I should say. And that's why you can have double-digit unemployment as far as the eye can see, and you wouldn't expect markets to fix it themselves. And that's why we need fiscal policy or monetary policy. But even among fans of the Austrian school, in particular, people who subscribe to the work of Leland Yeager and the so-called monetary disequilibrium theory, and they will say, even in a genuine market economy, without the government coming in and screwing things up per se, you can have a situation. I'm just about to stop talking, Jonathan. Don't worry, pace yourself.
That's fine. No
We're
worries.
we're getting to a point where, what if, I don't know, that for whatever reason, the public all of a sudden wants to hold more money. They want to increase their cash balances. They're fearful for the future. Whatever. People are going to travel more, and they feel like they need to have money on hand rather than, writing a check or something, and maybe the merchant won't accept it. Who knows? But for whatever reason, if there's a sudden increase in the demand to hold money, so the argument goes, again, even from people who are free marketeers, some are super radical libertarians, and this affects their views on how banks should work in a free society. Mm-hmm. And they'll say, in a situation like that, if the money stock isn't allowed to fluctuate, like if banks aren't allowed to issue more claims on money that effectively circulate as money, then what's going to happen is, the sudden demand to hold more cash means prices would have to fall in order for markets to continue to clear. And for various reasons, prices and wages, at least in some markets, are sticky. And which they mean is, if all of a sudden the fundamentals change and the market clearing price should be 20% lower, maybe that won't happen. It'll take a long time to get there. And so then you will have either gluts or shortages, depending on the situation in those markets. And if you just left, if the money is like gold coins, and we just gotta, go dig up more gold, that takes a while. All right. So that's the idea. And so again, the reason a lot of this stuff tends to go hand in hand is, if that's how you think the market economy works, and that so-called sticky prices can cause problems in non-market clearing in some pockets, at least, if there's a sudden swing in the demand to hold money, then it's not a coincidence that those types of economists also typically favor the ability of banks to engage in fractional reserve banking and to increase the quantity of money broadly defined in situations like that. So, if there's a sudden demand to hold more money, instead of having to endure a painful deflation in prices, instead the banks just create more money. Problem solved. right? And so therefore we get around the sticky price problem. So that's kind of how these debates play out. And so now, Jonathan, your paper is you're saying, no, I reject this notion of a free market, so-called sticky price as a concept. And so that's part of the implications. And so that's why some of these people were so triggered, if you'll forgive me for using that term, because they see where you're going with this. And so, okay. Are you okay with everything I said? And then do you want to elaborate on any of that or respond to what I just said?
Yeah, so I completely agree. I completely agree that we can have a non-market clearing outcome in the case of government intervention. And the reason why, as you shared, is because there are potential mutually beneficial transactions that could take place but are prevented from taking place because of either a price ceiling or a price floor. Like you gave the example of rent control or minimum wage policy. So obviously those sorts of things where there's this external constraint, and it has to be like through the threat of force that's preventing market participants from actually carrying out the trades that they consider to be mutually beneficial. That obviously can result in a mismatch of quantity supplied and quantity demanded. So there's no argument there. My argument is directed at the idea that we can have sticky prices that result in a lack of market clearing in unhampered markets, which many of the monetary disequilibrium theorists will say that. They'll say that prices, they don't adjust fast enough. And so like we get surpluses and shortages when there's a shift in supply or demand. And so, as you mentioned, one thing that we can do is we can say, well, hey, why don't we have banks increase the supply of fiduciary media? Some of them will even go, the ones not so connected to the Austrian school, they'll actually recommend that the central bank engage in expansionary monetary policy to correct or to accommodate this increase in the demand for money. So yeah, you're exactly right. That's where this argument leads. It leads in that direction. And I didn't really address all of those sorts of implications fully in the paper, but I'll go ahead and announce here that that's coming in a future paper where I go through I look more closely at the money relation, look more closely at the supply and demand graphs for money, just to see or show exactly that. Monetary equilibrium also is constantly established in the market clearing sense. Well, one other thing that I'll add here at this step is there's two sorts of problems that the monetary disequilibrium theorists say is a result of sticky prices. So one of them that I address head on in this paper is the idea that it causes a lack of market clearing. It causes markets to not clear. And so that's very plainly, no pun intended, solved by the Misesian plain state of rest idea that in real world transactions, quantity supplied equals quantity demanded. So there's no such thing as an unhampered market that's not clearing. But the other problem that is brought up actually doesn't refer to a lack of market clearing. They say that because markets are decentralized and money does not have a market of its own, this is something that shows up in Leland Yeager's writing and also George Selgin's writing. Money doesn't have a market of its own that can clear. It has to clear in all of the other markets. So it's easy to see that the market for bananas can clear as long as the price of bananas can adjust, right? Or the market for TVs or any one of these individual markets, is easy to see how it can clear. But if there's a change in the money relation, like a change in money demand or money supply, then what's required is all prices or enough prices, many prices have to change so that the purchasing power of money or the price level in the aggregate adjusts so that we have monetary equilibrium. And I point out in the paper that if you understand that goods markets are clearing constantly with every single exchange that occurs, and if you just flip your perspective of those exchanges, so if you think about instead of demanding a burrito, you're supplying money, and the person who is selling you the burrito is demanding money in that exchange. So if you just flip the goods, since money is a good, if you just flip your perspective on each exchange, then you realize that money is also clearing in every exchange. So we have a monetary equilibrium in the market clearing sense with every single exchange as well. So, and once you aggregate all of those exchanges and realize that each one of these exchanges involves a market clearing outcome, then that means money is also clearing. And so if you look at definitions of monetary equilibrium, they refer to monetary equilibrium as being established when the quantity of money equals desired money balances. So that's another thing that I addressed in a separate paper. We don't have to get into it now. But they say that monetary equilibrium means that there's an equality between money demand and money supply. And I point out that, well, once you think about the plain state of rest equilibrium construct and how it's established in real world markets, then that means we also have monetary equilibrium constantly.
Okay, a lot there. I'm glad you brought up the individual versus money clearing thing. So from your paper, I'll just read a little bit here. You say, proponents of monetary disequilibrium theory, MDT, emphasize, quote, sticky prices as a hindrance to achieving monetary equilibrium. According to this theory, monetary disequilibrium occurs when there is, quote, a discrepancy between actual and desired holdings of money at the prevailing price level, end quote, and price stickiness implies that, quote, automatic market forces working alone correct a severe monetary disequilibrium only slowly and painfully. Okay, so those you're quoting directly from Leland Yeager, who's sort of the the granddaddy of this perspective. And then this is back to Jonathan talking or writing. Some MDT, so monetary disequilibrium theory, proponents claim that sticky prices prevent markets from clearing. Others attribute stickiness to factors such as menu cost and price elasticity, which are already present in the supply and demand schedules in goods markets. This implies that individual goods markets may clear, but the overall price level cannot adjust to maintain monetary equilibrium. So you already kind of said it, but you said it fast. And can you just, again, just back up a little bit and go over that distinction? So you're saying somebody like a Selgin would, I think let's work with the idea of there's a sudden increase in the demand to hold money, that he might not deny that in any particular goods market that, the market for bananas, just because people want to hold more money per se, doesn't mean there's going to be a glut of bananas, but that could still clear. But the idea that no, in general, there still is going to be a shortage of money and a glut of goods in general, right? So that's kind of, I don't want to take this too far afield. It kind of goes back to Say's law, and that was one of the deal, that in any individual, if it's a barter world, there can't be a general glut or a general shortage, right? Because one person, each good is on one side of the transaction. But the idea is, if everything first trades against money, well, then you could at least theoretically imagine if everybody's trying to scramble and get money, and in a sense, there's not enough money to go around at the existing price level, then there could be a shortage of the money per se and a glut of goods in general. And then I take you to be saying, okay, but let's, instead of looking at the aggregate, let's look at each individual market and just say, is there a glut of bananas? Why would that happen? Why wouldn't the price fall? So anyway, go ahead. I'll shut up.
Oh yeah. Yeah. So just to reiterate the two different ideas that you see in the monetary disequilibrium theory literature is that sticky prices cause markets to not clear. And so I address that problem with the plain state of rest, but then I use the same concept, the Misesian plain state of rest, to also address the contention that that decentralized markets cause the price level itself, or its inverse, the purchasing power of money, to be slow to adjust to achieve a monetary equilibrium. So the like I said before, it's easy to see that that in individual goods markets, non-money goods markets, it's easy to see that those markets can clear. And somebody like George Selgin, maybe not Yeager, because he actually does say many times that the sticky prices result in markets not clearing. But there are monetary disequilibrium theorists who say that, okay, we can grant the fact that individual goods markets clear, but for money to clear, for the money relation to be in equilibrium, it requires many prices to adjust. It requires a complete adjustment of all prices in the economy, so that you get back to the point where the purchasing power of money is at that point where money supply equals money demand. So since there can be lags, adjustment periods that for individual goods market and their price and those prices to change, then you can have this case where there's an increase in the demand for money, but the price level is slow to adjust. So they would still say that markets are clearing, but since money doesn't clear on one single market, it clears on many markets or all markets, then you have to have all of these separate price adjustments happening in order for money to clear. And so I use the same concept, the plain state of rest, to answer that problem as well. And the answer, like I said before, is that you just have to switch your perspective of the market. Instead of thinking about people demanding and supplying non-monetary goods, just think about people doing the opposite with money. So with any exchange, somebody is demanding a good, which means that they're supplying money in that exchange, and somebody is supplying the non-money good, the bananas in a previous example, which means that they're demanding money in that exchange, which means that, once again, the Misesian plain state of rest explains how we have clearing with money with each transaction as well. Because all you have to do is just add up all of these transactions. You see the quantity of the good supplied equals the quantity of the good demanded, and you see the quantity of money supplied equals the quantity of money demanded. Add all of that up and you get a sequence, you get a process in which money is constantly clearing with every single exchange. One more thing, maybe this is a good way to continue the discussion. A lot of the people who were responding to this, they were making some sort of outlandish claims about the implications of all markets being in equilibrium. And I think a part of the confusion is this term equilibrium itself. And so somebody who's maybe not very well versed in the Austrian literature, or maybe not well versed in economics in general, they might think that there's just one form of equilibrium, that there's a market is in equilibrium or it's not. And that's actually, that's not true. There are many different kinds of equilibria that are equilibrium constructs that have been offered by different economists. In the Austrian school, I've singled out 4 main market equilibrium constructs. And the first one that's reached, the one that applies to the real world with every exchange, is the Misesian plain state of rest. But of course, there are other tendencies. There are other things that haven't changed yet, but will be changed as a result of the establishment of a plain state of rest price. And so those other equilibrium constructs that the market is tending towards, but isn't necessarily established with each exchange, are equilibria like the Wickstedian state of rest, where arbitrage opportunities have been noticed and annihilated. So people changing their buying and selling decisions because they see that there's a price discrepancy for the same good in 2 different markets. So that causes price equalization. So we call that the Wickstedian state of rest. So I would certainly grant that the plain state of rest is market clearing, but that doesn't mean that the conditions for these other equilibrium constructs have also been met with every single exchange. So obviously, with a plain state of rest, there could be different prices for the same good, which means that there's this tendency for the price to equalize. We get the law of one price in effect. But also there's profits to be had. And so the equilibrium construct that refers to profit opportunities being eliminated through the bidding for factors of production, we call that the final state of rest. And then there's this, by the way, the final state of rest is not attainable in the real world. But then there's this other very impossible sort of equilibrium construct in the Austrian literature called the evenly rotating economy. And that is completely impossible. We'll never reach that. The evenly rotating economy is like this Groundhog Day sort of situation where the market is repeating itself over and over again. There's no uncertainty. And the particular purpose of that equilibrium construct is mainly to distinguish between interest and profit. So to give sort of a big picture, what am I trying to say here? I completely acknowledge that market clearing is not the only sort of equilibrium. I'm not saying that every single market is it establishes equilibrium in all of those senses. I only mean it in the market clearing sense. And then in the paper, I spell out the implications for that for monetary disequilibrium theory.
Okay, great stuff. I'm trying to think, because the difficulty with this podcast, I'm talking to you, Jonathan, and also the audience, is I know we have a mixture. There are some people that are just casual fans of the Austrian approach. They're just tuning in to see, or people on YouTube might just see the title and wonder what's going on here. But then also there's people that have PhDs in economics and they've been in the Austrian tradition for 30 years and everybody in between. And so I'm trying to cater to all these people. So let's walk through a scenario. I think this will be the way to do it. We got a community that use gold coins as the money. And there's also banks, then that you can go deposit your gold coins at the bank, and the bank can give you a note that says this is issued by this bank and the Granite Trust Bank, and you turn this note in any one of our branches and you get a gold coin back. And let's remain agnostic for the moment about whether the banks have the notes backed up 100% by coins in the vault or whether they issue more paper notes than there are coins, okay? And so in that kind of world now, let's say for whatever reason, all of a sudden people want to hold twice as much in their cash balances as they did yesterday for whatever reason. Okay, so I don't mean that they want more wealth. I mean they want more money. Okay, and so then the question is, at the moment that change happens, it just happens instantaneously, what happens? And so clearly it can't be that, they just go and dig up another amount of, however much gold right now is in the economy in the form of gold coins. They can't just go dig that up out of the ground and stamp it into coins and then satisfy everybody's demand to double it, within 24 hours. That just is physically impossible. That's not going to happen. Mm-hmm. Okay, so the way, I think a Leyland Yeager or a Selgin or somebody would talk about this, in broad brushstrokes, especially to a popular audience and not get too technical, is to say there's two things that can happen here. Either we just stick to the 100%, gold coins are the money, by gosh, and the banks can't issue more notes. And so how can the public, get more gold coins? If everybody, a guy who has 10 gold coins right now to his name, whether it's in the bank or in his pockets, wants to get another 10, how can he do it? Well, of course, each individual, they're going to restrict their spending. How can you accumulate? They say, I get my income, and instead of going out and to the movies as much and going to restaurants, or I was getting ready to buy a car, instead I will get my income and I will just accumulate. I'll just save it. And that's how I'll accumulate. So each individual is thinking that, but in the aggregate, you can't snap your fingers and have twice as many gold coins as you did the day before. And so it's a combination of things that there's going to be downward pressure on prices, and the people who are in the business of mining gold are going to find all of a sudden that that's more profitable than it was yesterday. And so they're going to increase the rate of extraction. So the production of new gold coins is going to accelerate. But again, it's not just an instantaneous thing. And so the monetary disequilibrium theorists are going to say, if that's the only two options, then that's going to be a painful process. That if prices could just instantly adjust, if all the prices in the community could just drop in half, then everybody would have twice as much money, because what people really care about, economists think, is the purchasing power of their money balances, right? To say, I want, if you right now say, I like to have $100 in my wallet, that's based on the prices, right? If people 50 years ago wouldn't be saying, I want $100 in my wallet, that'd be a ton of money, So anyway, so that's the idea. So if prices fell in half, then your money goes twice as far. So one way, again, just to circle back, if the community just magically all of a sudden wants to have twice as much money, then prices could just fall in half. Or you could get twice as many gold coins, and the monetary disequilibrium theorists say each of those in the real world is impractical. The prices can't just all fall. Maybe some can, the price of wheat, price of soybeans or something, sure, but labor, wage rates aren't just going to get cut in half. Then you got long-term contracts. And, and other types of debt instruments, those can't get cut in half. Those are fixed money terms. You've got bond payments and things. Those are all locked in. They can't adjust. Those are sticky. And so that's going to be problematic if you expect all prices to instantly get cut in half. And you're going to have to wait if it takes real resources to go dig up more gold. So why don't we just let the banks issue more notes? And that's how we do it. So it's as if there's twice as many gold coins, even though there really isn't, because now we've got 2 notes to 1 coin in the vault, and that solves the problem. Okay, so that's kind of where they're coming from. And so, Jonathan, I take it, among other things, you don't want to give the option of having the banks just print up a bunch of notes. And so are you saying that, oh no, they're wrong, prices would just all get cut in half tomorrow? Go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm not saying that prices would just adjust immediately in that sort of way. What has to happen is a market process in which people demonstrate their increased demand for money by not purchasing certain things, by holding on to more of their income, by building up their cash balances. And as you mentioned, a consequence of that is that involves decreasing the demand for non-money goods and services. So like there is a step-by-step process in which that occurs according to people's preferences when they are able to demonstrate them in action and in exchange. So this goes back to earlier you were reading the first part of my paper. The monetary disequilibrium guys, they refer to this difference between actual and desired holdings of money. Mm-hmm. And so I dismiss that way of thinking about money demand, that there's no such, at least scientifically, in terms of pure economic theory, the way that we think about what happens in markets, there's no way to think about or operationalize desired money balances, because this is something that's like a plan. I mean, maybe we could say things about it in like a psychological sort of sense, but the way that we actually see money demand in action is with actual exchanges taking place. So how do people put their increased money demand into effect? And the answer is they demonstrate it by reducing their purchases, by reducing their demand for non-money goods and services. And when that happens, once again, you get another clearing of the money relation, another clearing of all goods markets. As soon as there's that sort of change in market conditions, you get another market clearing outcome with the new exchanges that take place after that change. One other thing that I'll add about this, actually two things, is as you implied when you were setting up this sort of scenario, when people have an increase in money demand, it's not that they just want additional units of money, that's what is provided by the banks when they just issue new pieces of paper that are fractionally backed. So it's not that people want just additional units of money. What they actually want is purchasing power. So saying that a solution to the problem, so to speak, of an increase in money demand is having banks or the central bank increase the money supply, that actually doesn't solve the problem. That doesn't give the people what they want. What do people want when they have increased money demand? They want increased purchasing power. They want increased cash balances that are able to purchase more goods and services. They don't just want more gold coins or more dollars in their wallets or a higher number associated with their bank account. What they want is the ability to purchase more goods and services. That's what they're actually demanding. And so if the response to that is, hey, you want more purchasing power, here's some new units of money that didn't exist before, you're actually not giving people what they want. You're giving people nominal new money balances when what they were demanding was real money balances. Okay, one other thing that you mentioned there that I'll comment on is this idea that long-term contracts make it difficult for prices to change. And so I talk about this in the paper. What's actually going on when a new long-term contract is entered is that the market clears when the contract is signed. And what's actually being exchanged is the promise of future payments, or in the case of a labor contract, the promise of future labor services of like a certain kind. You're going to work this many hours. You're going to do these sorts of duties at my business. That's what's being exchanged is promises. I'll pay you this hourly wage, and you promise to perform these duties. So once the contract is signed, the market clears. Now, what happens after the fact is the person who signed that contract performs certain labor services. They do their duties. They show up to work. They work a certain number of hours throughout their contract, and the employer pays them a wage. But that wage actually isn't a market price anymore. That the payments that are made from the employer to the employee, that's not a market price. That payment is not something that works to clear a market between the employer and the employee. It's just fulfillments. Those payments are fulfillments of the original terms that were established on day one when the labor contract was signed. And this is something that William H. Hutt talked about. He said that whether it's a debt contract or a labor contract or anything where there's promises to provide certain things in the future in exchange for other things being provided in the future, including payments, including money flows, cash flows in the future. Those cash flows, those payments in the future are not market prices. They don't function as market prices. Those are just fulfillments of the original terms. So it's incorrect to say that if there's a change in market conditions after the contract is signed, that those two people are sort of stuck to the payments that were established in that contract. The wage, we'll stick with the wage example. They're sort of stuck to paying that wage, even though maybe labor demand has decreased or something else has changed. All that does is that just introduces potential gains and losses for the parties involved. It's the same thing as an entrepreneur who's bearing the uncertainty of the market. They think that by producing this good and employing factors of production today so that they can produce something that consumers want in the future, they think that they might be able to earn, let's say, $1,000 in consumer revenue by selling this good. But suppose they're wrong. Suppose that the demand for that good actually isn't there, and they're only able to, get $700 in revenue. Well, that means that entrepreneur made an error. They incorrectly guessed what future market conditions would be. It doesn't mean that the market's not clearing. It doesn't mean that there is a disequilibrium in the market clearing sense. It simply means that somebody committed to something today that didn't pan out for them. And by the way, it goes in the other direction as well. Sometimes we're surprised and we have gains that are attributable to, like I made this guess and it turned out even better than I expected. So that's just entrepreneurial gains, errors, and losses going forward into time. It's not the fact that there's a lack of market clearing. Does that make sense? Was that too sort of convoluted?
Yes to both. It made sense and it was too convoluted. So
well, please clear it up for
let
the
me try
listeners.
Well, I'm not going to paraphrase what you said, but I'm going to make a related point. And I've said this before, probably to you, Jonathan, on the podcast, but it's interesting. So here, we're not so much going after the Selgin, Leyland Jaeger types, but like in a Keynesian framework, again, they would point to the sticky prices and they would probably call it a market failure and say, yep, the market left to its own devices if, let's say during the 30s, that, there were, because of the banking panics and whatever, the people were pulling their money in the banks, and given the fractional reserve nature of the banking system, there's a sense in which the broader money stock, like measured by M1 or M2, went down by like a third from 1929 to 1933. Okay, so given that the money held by the public, broadly measured, went down by so much, it's not surprising that the sales of businesses went down, right? Revenue that businesses earned from selling their stuff also went down from 29, 30, 31, 32. And so if you had perfectly flexible wages, the businesses just would have lowered their the nominal wage rate they paid. And so there's no reason that unemployment should have skyrocketed. But hey, wages are sticky. And so that market failure, that's what happened, that wages couldn't go down. And so therefore, that's why you needed the Fed should have flooded the market with more money. Milton Friedman would agree with that too. And then failing that, if that wasn't enough, then the federal government should have come in and run big deficits to maintain that demand, because the market got stuck in a rut, the silly markets, and they're so volatile, and they're like a turtle getting flipped on its back, and we wise Keynesians have to come in and flip the turtle over occasionally. Okay, so in that framework there, the sticky prices, particularly sticky wages, are like this problem that, if it weren't for that, then the market might work. But there is this weird feature. And what's funny is, can you imagine a world in which every day the workers show up to the factory and then there's a chalkboard and the foreman just says, this is how much you're getting paid today? Do you think the Keynesians and everybody would be saying, "Oh, well, that's a really good system for the worker"? No, they would say that's a failure. That's why we need to have government, generous government social programs, because this crazy market, you don't even know what your wage rate is going to be day by day. That's nutty. If only there were a way to lock in a long-term contract so you could know for like a full year what your wage per hour was going to be. That might make sense, but not this crazy wildcat market where it's like your soybeans or, So I hope people get what I'm saying there, that. And also, too, just what I said, it's not random as to why are some prices, quote, sticky and other ones aren't. Or like you were saying, Jonathan, about, I have $1,000. I'm going to buy a bond from some corporation and they're going to pay me $50 a year for 10 years and then give me back my $1,000. I'll do that. It would be crazy if 3 years into it, the corporation could just say, hey, you know what? There was a sudden increase in demand for money. Our sales fell off. And so instead of us paying you what the contract says, how about we get to reduce it by 50%? Because otherwise, Leland Yeager says markets won't clear. We can't have that. No, that would be a violation of the contract. And you can imagine, all the left-wing progressives losing their minds that these corporations agreed to one thing on the front end when they sold the bonds and then weren't fulfilling it. So my point is the quote stickiness of stuff is not just some fact of nature. There's a reason some prices are stickier than others. And so again, that's all part of it. And this is all the market process, particularly if we're talking about, as we are with like the Selgin white people, if we're hypothesizing, this theoretically pure free society, and we want to say, how would things work there? Like we all agree what happened partly in the early 30s, the reason wages were, quote, stickier then than they were in the 1920 and 21 depression is that Herbert Hoover called in all the big labor unions and big companies and said, don't cut wage rates, because Hoover had this notion that, it's a downward spiral race to the bottom. If we just keep the purchasing power with the workers, they can be paid enough to buy back the product. And that's how we'll nip it in the bud, right? So it wasn't empirically, wages fell much more sharply from 1920 to 21 than they did in any 12-month period in the Great Depression, right? So it's not that this is just some feature of capitalism. For some reason, wages, quote, got stickier downward 10 years later. And I would say it's not, we know why. Like we can see what Herbert Hoover and his administration did. And it wasn't them just running around saying laissez-faire for the win. Okay, so in any event, I know I said a lot there, but I guess my main point is the so-called stickiness here. There's reasons to explain them. And again, these are or could be market outcomes, in which case it would be weird to say, yes, the market could have worked if prices were flexible, but alas, they're not, and that's why we need intervention to fix the stupid market.
Yeah, that reminds me of something. I think I heard it from Peter Klein first. Maybe it was like a Mises U lecture, maybe something that he wrote. He talks about how sticky prices, or the stickiness of a price, so to speak, is a choice variable. That if you think about like retail markets, the firms can decide how rapid they would like to be able to change their prices. And so they'll design their menus or their catalogs or the ways that they post their prices in such a way that makes it either easier or harder for them to change their price. And this is something that I brought up in the paper. So like you can imagine a restaurant that maybe sells fresh seafood. Like we see this all the time. And instead of actually printing a price on the menu, they'll say market price, or maybe they'll have like a chalkboard or something that's displayed where everybody can see of what are the prices of these menu items today. And so like changing a price of that is as easy as just, pulling out your eraser, erasing it and writing a new number. But we also see gas stations, they use these digital billboards outside, and also the prices are displayed at the gas pump digitally, where all they have to do is press a button and can change their price. There are some department stores like Kohl's that I've seen that they use those sorts of like digital price displays on the shelves in the store. So it's very easy for them to change prices if they want to. And the reason why the gas station, the restaurant, or the department store would choose to do that sort of thing is because they anticipate that this is the profit maximizing choice for us. We think that our customers are not going to be so deterred by the fact that our prices change on a daily basis or even on an hourly basis. We don't think that they're going to be deterred so much that we lose business, but we want to be able to update prices based on costs changing based on changes in consumer demand, whatever it is. We want to be able to update our prices more frequently. And so we're going to adapt this sort of technology that allows us to change our prices quickly. Now, other businesses, like if you think back in the old days with the Sears catalog, those businesses were sort of committed to prices for a longer period of time because they would have to print up a catalog that would last for like a half a year or a quarter or something, which would mean that they're committing to those prices for that time period and be very costly for them to try to change their prices. But once again, they do that based on first of all, how costly would it be for us to undertake this program of making it so that we can update our prices more quickly, like with the digital billboard signs. But they're also thinking, hey, I think customers like the fact that they can, there's more certainty that when the customer walks into the store, when they open up the catalog, that the price hasn't changed as much. And so they're setting their prices with that in mind. The point is that it's a choice variable. And so, and it passes through the preferences and expectations of the sellers when they're actually putting those prices either on the menus or in the catalog or on the billboard signs, which means that it doesn't pose a problem for market clearing. So if it's already taken into account in their supply schedules, then you still get the intersection of supply and demand and the market clears. There's nothing that could cause there's nothing about menu costs that prevent markets from clearing.
Yeah, great stuff. And just to elaborate a little bit on those examples, and those are great ones, that at the restaurant, as you're saying, Jonathan, even if you are in a situation where, there's certain things where the price is not printed on the menu and they just say market price, which is funny, right? Because that makes it sound like, oh, are these other prices not market prices? It's Leyland Yeager, like, see, I told you, Jonathan, you should have listened to me. And so, of course, that's not what they mean. You understand in context what they mean is they're saying we need to know what our like wholesale price is before we can tell you because, and notice it's not that every price is like that, right? So it's interesting. So clearly there must be some reason that it's some prices and not other ones. And so like, why is it that they can list and tell you on the menu what the cheeseburger meal cost, but if you want to get the crab legs, they can't? And it's because the fish is like has to be fresh, and if they're in Boston or something, it's we're getting it that day from when the boats come in or whatever, and so that's how they have to. So that whereas if they're getting a bunch of eggs that are in the refrigerator, those they don't need to use them the day they come in. Okay, there's things like that, and also they don't want to be caught. Again, with like they get the lobster or something in, and they want to be able to move it right away. And they don't want to be caught in a situation. They could, if they had to, just list a price. But then probably what is happening is they would err on the side of charging a higher one and not getting as much. And then often when people said, oh, yeah, I want to get the lobster, that was great last time, they say, sorry, we don't have any. Yeah. Like there'd be a lot of, quote, shortages if that's the way they had to do it. And so by having flexible prices, and you see this stuff too, like with Uber or whatever, like on New Year's Eve, they might have surge pricing that's really outrageous, from the customer's point of view. But that's how you quickly allocate, in terms of, if the demand, they don't know what it's going to be. And then by having the price skyrocket, you can bring more people in. Was it Wendy's that recently they dabbled and they backed off of it where they were going to have surge pricing and I think in their mind they were saying, oh, when demand, when there's real lackluster demand, it'll be cheaper. And like, if you want to go get something at 2:00 in the afternoon, it's a lot cheaper than at 5:00. But people were worried that, they're just going to jack up the price at rush hour. So in any event, the other thing I'll say too is you said the gas station example. Notice too there, what they do is they have them on huge billboards that you can see from a mile away in a lot of cases to see what is the price. In other words, it's not that you have to pull up to the pump and get out of your car and then go look, and then that's when you learn what's the price right now for the gallon of gas. So no, from down the street what it is. And again, so they're trying to balance, because again, it's this trade-off of they have volatile wholesale prices, and so that they're constrained by that. But on the other hand, they know if the customer has no idea what they're getting, then they're less likely to come here. And that's why restaurants don't just have every price be market price. Because, hey, how do we know what the price of beef is going to be today? So we got to leave it open, because then when people are saying, hey, should we go out to eat? If there's some restaurant where you could go, you could park, and you can meet all your friends there, and you get in there and you look, and the stuff is 30% more than you were expecting, that means you don't want to go there as much. So they want to have some certainty, but again, they don't know what the lobster is going to cost them that day, so they got to remain flexible.
Yeah, one other thing that I mentioned in a different article on the menu cost idea is that one thing that is, especially in retail markets, that firms do when they see or notice or anticipate a decrease in demand for the good is it's very easier for them to employ price promotions. So like if you think about a department store, sometimes they'll take old inventory that hasn't sold yet, but they want to liquidate it. They want to get it out so that they have room to put the new clothes out on the racks. And so one thing that they'll do is, instead of actually taking price tags off and putting new price tags on, they'll just put it on a rack that says everything on this rack is 20% off or 50% off or something like that. So like price promotions, where all you have to do is just put up one sign, basically everything on this shelf or everything on this rack is discounted by a certain amount. That allows extra price flexibility without huge menu costs, without printing up a new catalog, for example. One thing that the proponents of the sticky price idea point to is they say that unsold inventory or the lack of exchange demonstrates or indicates a market not clearing. So suppose somebody puts some goods on a shelf and that shelf has a price posted, and then a certain number of customers come in, but they don't buy the entire stock. And so at the end of the day, there's some leftover inventory. Or any other case where there's, items left over that the seller would have liked to have sold, but wasn't able to because there wasn't enough demand that at least that day or whatever the time period is. So I address this concern in the article by pointing out that the unsold inventory is actually just reservation demand. So this is something that might be a little convoluted to talk through, but if you are using standard Marshallian supply and demand graphs, it's really hard to see what's going on when a seller has unsold inventory at the end of the day. If you're using Marshallian supply and demand, it's very easy to draw that in such a way that there's excess supply. So the unsold inventory is excess supply, the market's not clearing, we have disequilibrium, market failure, all that. But what I show is that we can use what's called total stock and total demand analysis, which Rothbard goes through in Man, Economy, and State in the earlier chapters when he's talking about price theory, how are prices determined. I showed that what's actually happening is there's a flat section of reservation demand. So reservation demand is the stuff that you want to hold on to and not sell at the given price. And so it applies to money. So like if somebody is holding on to cash balances, that's their reservation demand for money. And so Rothbard also applies that to the money relation or the supply and demand for money in later chapters. But any item that is held by the seller and not sold is a part of their reservation demand, which means that we still have an equality of the total stock of the good and the total demand for the good, which includes the reservation demand and the exchange demand. And the exchange demand is on the part of the customers that come in and they want that good and they're willing to give money in exchange for it. So what that means is the Marshallian supply and demand graph, while it's super useful, I use it all the time when I'm teaching macroeconomics and microeconomics. It means that it has that sort of limitation. It's very easy to show that there is a disequilibrium in those cases. But if you look at the total stock and total demand analysis, then it's easy to see that the unsold inventory, it's not excess supply, it's actually reservation demand. And what's going on is there's a flat section of it where they put a bunch of items for sale on the shelf and they post a price and they allow customers to come in and decide how many units of that good they'd like to purchase at that price. And so they're allowing consumer demand to determine the amount of unsold inventory at the end of the day. And the reason they do that is they've decided that that's a better course of action. It's a better way for us to do business than trying to negotiate prices with every single customer that walks into the door. It's easier for us to just post one price for this good, and people can take it or leave it. People can come and they can buy as much as they want. Anything that they don't buy, we'd prefer to hold on to it so that we can sell it at a later date at least the same price. Maybe if it takes too long, they might start to lower the price. But the point is that inventory is purposefully retained. The firm has decided we are willing to hold on to this unsold inventory, which means that it's a part of reservation demand, which means you still get the intersection of supply and demand, or total stock and total demand.
Yeah, so thank you for bringing that up, and that is great, like to think through these things. That phenomenon, I think, is most evident and obvious to like regular people when it comes to real estate, right? So like, let's say you want to sell your house, and you say, well, how much do you think your house is worth? I don't know, $250,000. Okay. What do you mean by that? You don't mean that next Thursday I could no longer own my house and I will have $250,000 in my bank account. Even though if you say like, oh, I own this many shares of such and such company, and someone says how much, and you say $250,000 worth, that is what you mean. You mean, yeah, I could press a button, go do it online or call my broker or whatever, and I could within 48 hours or something, have turned my shares into dollars in my account. But a house, you don't mean that. Usually what you mean is, oh yeah, if I marketed it, we cleaned it up, we got an agent, had open houses and so on, maybe over 3 months, I could eventually sell this thing. And so now what's interesting there, just to push it further, is if you really did need to sell it in a month, you could, but you wouldn't get $300,000 for it. You could, charge a much lower price and move it faster. And so likewise too, like a gas station, you go in there and you see, geez, wow, the bottles of water here are a lot more than they would be if I went to the grocery store down the street. And that's because, as Jonathan's saying, the guy who owns the gas station is not worried if at the end of the day he says, oh, wow, there was a glut. I have way too many things in my I didn't sell out. Geez, I should. In other words, he's not pricing it to have his shelves be empty at the end of the period, even though, by some crude applications of the supply and demand graph, you might say, well, geez, he brought all these bottles to market and people only bought 1/10 of what he supplied. So that's a huge glut. That's a huge imbalance. The quantity supplied was and that's just the wrong way to analyze that market. So clearly you got to use a longer time frame. Okay, so in those examples, you can see this principle, and that's so last question I have for you, Jonathan, is I think the sophisticated, fan of Selgin and White or whatever could hear all this, and they'd be like, okay, yes, and they would just keep agreeing because what we're saying is so awesome. But at this point, they would say, you guys, though, no, this is like a semantic game you're playing, that, yeah, there's a sense in which the worker gets laid off and he's got other options and he's looking around and he doesn't just take the first job offer. But come on, even in the terms of the Austrian business cycle theory, if we're not talking about minimum wages, there's a sense in which unemployment goes up to 9%. And it's not because the government's directly intervening in the labor market. You can talk about, what they did with banking and caused the unsustainable boom. But are you guys denying that there's some sense in which, yeah, there is unemployment and the labor market is not clearing and it takes some time to sort that out? And yeah, you can blame the government, but the not clearing part is not, purely just because of a price floor on labor, that's just it's the fallout. And there is a legitimate sense in which you could say the labor market's not clearing, and don't just try to use your plain state of rest semantics to try to make me not see what's in front of my face. I got pretty animated there. I was doing a method acting. Go ahead.
No, it was good job. So I'm not saying that there's no such thing as malinvestment. There's no such thing as an increase in unemployment statistics in the bust phase of a business cycle. Of course, we see the unemployment statistic rise, like unemployment rates rise when we go into a recession. This actually came up in a response to somebody. I actually can't remember what their question was when I posted the summary of the paper on Twitter, because they eventually deleted their question. I'm not sure if they were ashamed of it or what, or maybe there's too much attention being drawn to them. But yeah, so I explained what's actually going on in the bust phase of the business cycle when we see the unemployment statistics go up. So the semantic problem here is we often use the term unemployment to refer to a surplus in the labor market where the quantity of labor supplied exceeds the quantity of labor demanded. So there's a lot of people at a price or at a wage who want to work, but there's not enough demand for the firms don't want to employ that many workers at whatever the prevailing price is. So we call that sort of disequilibrium, that lack of market clearing, that surplus in the labor market. We call it unemployment. But then we also have these statistics like the unemployment rate that's published at the St. Louis Fed. Like you can go and see it goes up and down. We call that unemployment as well. And my point is that those unemployment statistics are not capturing a lack of market clearing in labor markets. They're not capturing disequilibria in labor markets. What they're capturing is people who have been laid off from a job and they're waiting for another double coincidence of wants, another opportunity for them to find another job. And so if listeners are interested in like what's actually going on in labor markets that would cause that sort of thing to happen, there's a great a chapter in Human Action by Ludwig von Mises called Work and Wages, where he talks through how workers might prefer to stay in a certain profession, stay in a certain career because that's what they're used to, or they perceive that there's some sort of status associated with maintaining the career, the profession that I had before I was laid off. Maybe people are beholden to a certain geographic area, like their family lives close by, and so they don't want to move far away to get a job somewhere else. Or maybe they value leisure to a certain extent that is delaying the amount of time it takes for them to find a new job because they enjoy the time off that they have now. Those sorts of things can delay the amount of time it takes for somebody to go from one job to another job. But the point is that while somebody is on the labor market, technically, in terms of like economic theory, if they're searching for a job, they're what W.H. Hutt, I'll bring him up again, he referred to them as being self-employed in job prospecting. So they're technically employed by themselves because they anticipate that by not taking the first job that is available to them at maybe a super low wage or in a career that they're not used to, by not taking that first opportunity available to them, what they're demonstrating is that they anticipate future opportunities for employment that are better. They anticipate like a better possible career, better possible job that will become available to them in the future. So that's actually investment. That's investment in themselves. They're employing themselves in this task of looking through, researching, applying to jobs, seeing what's available. And I think the prospecting or the prospector sort of analogy works really well because it's the same thing that like if like you think back to like gold rush times, like the prospectors who would go out, they would try to find where's the gold strain underground. So if we look at this hypothetical prospector, what they're doing is, they're sort of scratching their chin, they're looking around, looking at the lay of the land, they're trying to figure out where the best possible places for me to start digging to see where the gold strain is. And like a Keynesian economist or a monetary disequilibrium theorist might say, oh, this person is unemployed because he's not actively digging into the ground. He's not actively pulling chunks of gold out of the ground. So he's actually unemployed. That's an idle resource. But of course, that's wrong. What's actually going on is this person is still employed in the process of looking for gold. It's just at that time when he's surveying the land, trying to figure out where the gold is underground, he hasn't quite figured it out yet. He's still trying to figure out what's the best possible place for me to start digging. That's the same thing that the unemployed worker is doing when they're looking at potential job opportunities. So we still have labor markets clearing in that case. It's just got these sorts of weird things going on. It means that they're not currently employed in a job working for an employer, but they are employed in this prospecting task of finding the best possible option for myself.
Somewhat related to how all the waiters and waitresses in LA are actors and actresses.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm just in between my next big role. So, okay, well, I can anticipate what all the responses would be then, and probably what you would say then, but we got to wrap it up there. I think we've done enough to give people a commercial. They should go read your paper, and I've at least tried to play devil's advocate and say what some of the critics are going to bring up. So thank you, Jonathan, for writing the paper and coming here and telling us all about it.
Yeah, hopefully it doesn't take too long for you to find another acting job, playing the devil's advocate and doing something else. Yeah, thanks for having me on, Bob.
Sure thing. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in. And hopefully you weren't doing another job while you're listening to this, because this is so interesting. We'll see you next time.
Check back next week for a new episode of the Human Action Podcast. In the meantime, you can find more content like this on Mises.org.